All right, class. Let's play a little game. Imagine this. You walk into a room and suddenly you realize you've forgotten why you even came in. You stand there, staring into the void of your own confusion, trying to retrace your steps. Sound familiar? Congratulations, you've just experienced a retrieval failure. But let's rewind. How did this happen in the first place? To understand that, we have to break down memory into three powerful processes: encoding, storage, and retrieval. The first step in making a memory is encoding. Imagine your brain as a camera constantly snapping pictures of the world around you. But unlike a camera, your brain doesn't store everything. If it did, you'd be drowning in an ocean of meaningless details. Instead, your brain uses selective attention to decide what's important. Encoding is how we take raw sensory input and turn it into something meaningful we can later recall. There are three primary ways we encode information: visual encoding, pictures and mental images. When we remember faces, places, or how objects look, we're using visual encoding, storing information as mental images. Ever studied by drawing diagrams or using flashcards? That's your brain translating words into pictures. The more vivid the image, the better it sticks. This is why memory champions use the method of loci, mentally placing things they want to remember in a familiar place, like their childhood home. Acoustic encoding, sounds and speech. Ever had a song stuck in your head for days? That's acoustic encoding at work. We process and store information by the way it sounds. Think about how we remember rhymes and song lyrics without effort. Our brains latch onto rhythmic patterns. This is also why repetition, saying something aloud, strengthens memory, especially for verbal learning. Semantic encoding, meaning and associations, is the most powerful form of encoding. If we connect new information to something we already understand, we're much more likely to remember it. Let's say you learn a new fact in psychology. If you relate it to a personal experience, it becomes much easier to retrieve later. This is why deep thinking, elaboration, and making connections to prior knowledge improve memory. Now, encoding is just the beginning. Once we've decided what's important, we need to store it. But where? Memory storage is like a three-layered cake, and each layer plays a different role in keeping information alive. Let's break it down. Sensory memory, the fastest filter. The first stop for all incoming information is sensory memory, where raw sensory data like sights, sounds, tastes and so on is briefly held. Imagine walking through a crowded street, hearing snippets of conversations, smelling food and seeing 100 different people at once. Most of that information is forgotten instantly, but some details make it to the next stage. Sensory memory lasts only a few milliseconds to a few seconds. There are three major types. Iconic memory, which is visual, lasts less than a second, like a flash of a lightning bolt. Echoic memory, which is auditory, can last up to 4 seconds, which is why you can sometimes hear the last few words of someone's sentence, even if you weren't listening. Haptic memory, which is related to touch, allows you to briefly remember the feeling of something you just touched. Short-term memory, the workbench of the mind. If sensory memory is a passing glance, short-term memory, or STM, is like a sticky note. It holds a small amount of information, but only temporarily. STM allows us to hold information just long enough to use it. This is why you can remember a phone number long enough to dial it, but forget it seconds later. STM is limited in two ways. Capacity, it holds about 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information at a time, which is why phone numbers are 7 digits long. Duration, it lasts 15 to 30 seconds, unless you actively rehearse it. A powerful tool to extend STM is chunking, breaking down information into meaningful units. That's why you can remember CIA, FBI, NASA more easily than CIA, FBI, NASA. Long-term memory. The brain's hard drive. If short-term memory is like a sticky note, then long-term memory is more like a locked vault, storing information permanently. Unlike short-term memory, which has its limits, long-term memory has unlimited capacity and duration. There are two main types of long-term memory: explicit or declarative memory and implicit or procedural memory. Explicit memory includes facts and experiences you can consciously recall, like remembering your graduation. On the other hand, implicit memory involves skills and habits you don't think about, such as riding a bike. Now, let's talk about retrieval. What's the point of storing all this information if you can't find it when you need it? Have you ever had a word right on the tip of your tongue, but no matter how hard you try, you just can't get it out? That's a retrieval failure. Retrieval is the process of pulling information from long-term storage into conscious awareness. There are two main ways we retrieve information. Recall retrieving information without cues, like answering essay questions or remembering your first pet's name. Recognition, identifying information when presented with choices, such as multiple choice tests or recognizing a familiar face in a crowd. Factors that affect retrieval include context-dependent memory and state-dependent memory. You're more likely to remember something if you're in the same physical environment where you first learned it. Additionally, your mood and emotional state can influence which memories are most accessible. The serial position effect is a fascinating phenomenon. Essentially, we tend to best remember the first and last items in a sequence. This is known as the primacy and recency effects. Why do we forget? Well, let's dive into some theories. First, there's the decay theory. Memories fade if they're not used. Like an old dusty book left on a shelf, then we have interference. New and old memories compete, making it harder to retrieve the right one. And finally, the misinformation effect. Memories can be altered by false or leading information, which is why eyewitness testimony can be unreliable. Final thoughts, making memory work for you. So, how do we make sure we remember what matters? Here's how you can optimize your memory. Chunking information. Instead of trying to remember everything separately, group related items together. This makes it easier for your brain to organize and retrieve information. Using mnemonics, create acronyms, rhymes, or visual images to reinforce memory. For example, Holmes helps people remember the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. Elaborative rehearsal. Go beyond repetition. Connect new information to something meaningful or personal. If you can explain it to someone else, you understand it. And let's not forget sleep and rest. Your brain consolidates memories during deep sleep. Pulling an all-nighter sabotages memory storage. So, next time you forget where you put your keys, don't panic. It's just your brain running a bad retrieval search. But with these strategies, you'll never forget important information again.